I have been knowing Soraya for a number of years now. Now I know she has been active in ICJP for those years, as her schedule has allowed. I have known her as a peacemaker. I think when we were first getting acquainted, she was leading Peace Moms, which was a way to bring dialogue, and particularly Christian, Jewish, Muslim dialogue, I believe, and she was also writing then, which I think she's continued. I think I saw she written a book now about raising peaceful kids, and she has also had a brief stint. She was one of our peace teachers one summer, I remember, in peace camp, which unfortunately or fortunately coincided with Ramadan. So we were trying to lead a group of unruly youth while also fasting and going on long walks to Exposition Park and the pool, which I thought was pretty remarkable for her faith commitment at that point. I know that she has gone on to lead lots of interfaith discussions and with uh, um, a Muslim women speakers that she has organized, and interfaith dialogue on many fronts. I know I saw recently she was posting about some work she had done in Portland, Oregon. So I feel very proud to know her and happy that she and I have become friends over these years, and that she is still related to us at ICJP, and that she is such a powerful force for peace in our world. And with that, I shall turn it over to her.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, everybody. I feel like a mosquito in a nudist colony. Feeling wonderful to be here, but just wondering where to begin. I think I've had a romance with the ICUJP for almost 20 years now. They say out of sight is out of mind, but I don't think that's true. Even though I have not been diligent in attending the meetings due to caring for my children, their schedules, this is so heartening for me to be welcomed in this way, to feel at home. Thank you again. I feel like I'm with family. Anthony said, Soraya, why don't you speak again? And I said, yes. And I had proposed two topics. One was the persecution of Muslims in Sri Lanka, or dismantling patriarchy in the Muslim world. And Grace said, hey, why don't you combine the two? So that was a tough task. But but I just realized that has been my calling all along, to combine the two. And this comes from the teachings of Dr. King, who spoke very heavily on the concept of moral reciprocity. Uh, in his writings, Time to Break the Silence, he talks about this. True compassion, he says, more than flipping a coin at the beggar. It is not a haphazard and it is not haphazard and superficial. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars need to be reconstructed. So he spoke of this in the context of the Good Samaritan. And he said, being the Good Samaritan is only the initial act. One day, the whole of Jericho, he said, the road must be transformed. Men and women must not be constantly robbed and beaten. So for me, that robbed and the beaten comes from a space of the way, the position of the Muslim women in the world today. We are constantly robbed and beaten, and still we show up for this powerful cause of building relationships with people of other faiths, promoting dialogue, and carrying proudly the identity of being who a Muslim is. So in that context, I'm very glad Grace suggested this, and to be able to merge the two topics. Um, so I am not a scholar, and I will not pretend to be one. I'm just a simple activist. And I myself, I come from a level of marginality. I'm a woman, I'm a Muslim woman, and I'm today a South Asian American woman. But I must say, having traveled the world, working in Nigeria, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, India, I recognize that I also have immense privilege. And that is that I live in the United States of America. Today, I don't think many of us who are first generation or second generation immigrants, we can go back to our countries of origin because things are pretty bad. We have leaders who openly are bigoted, who are racist, who produce and spew hatred. So I want every one of us, no matter what our political ideology or affiliations, we have to be really proud that we have a leader from the White House who engages in right speech. This is a critical value Buddha spoke about of the Eight Noble Paths. He said, have a right vision, have a good intention, and engage in right speech. So I see our current president as somebody who is a unifier. He tries to bring us together and he tries to keep us together. So we must, I think, I mean, every day give gratitude for that particular thing alone, because folks, that is a blessing. Because this morning I don't usually look at international news. I don't look at my WhatsApp. I don't look at my emails early morning. But things were happening so bad in the Middle East. I looked at some of the readings, and I'm disturbed. I'm not that. I don't feel that effervescence that I usually feel. I'm sad and I'm grieving because things are escalating at such a bad speed, and we are recognizing constantly to be human. Let's not take this for granted. I even have a practice where I write about 3 to 4 things that I'm grateful for on a daily basis. Let us include the leader of our country, because it's a powerful thing that somebody wakes up and tries to give us a message um, of hope and of unity. So, as an activist, I believe firmly that it is within my power to make good noise, to initiate great and necessary change. And this is critical for my work because I feel there's a huge disconnect between activists on the ground and scholars, especially in the Muslim field. Scholars, I see them writing beautiful things from their boardrooms. They interpret and they reinterpret scripture, and they don't know the reality that's happening on the ground. If we some of these universities that they work within, they're highly funded by rich countries. In fact, Saudi Arabia spent 375 million in the last 4 years, gave a gift to Yale and Harvard as well. And today we know the United States government is investigating these foreign gifts and contracts. So in the Muslim world, I'm sad, but I have to admit we have lacked contextuality of our theology. I say this because coming from Sri Lanka in the early 70s, the ecumenical movements in Sri Lanka were very strong until the nationalistic movement has taken over today, the Buddhist nationalists. I read about it, and people who were involved in the conference, they told me this story, and I was blown away. And we need to go back to that era where there was once a huge conference that was planned for South Asians in a beautiful hotel, and all the leading clergy came to participate at the conference. And then the convener of the conference said the conference is not taking place in the hotel. We have assigned each of you to go to the village, live with the villagers for a week, and then come back and tell us what did you find. Live, listen, and learn. So they went to the villagers, they lived, they listened, and they learned, and they found out the urgent, the biggest question the villagers, the people had was, how can we serve the next meal? Where can we be assured of our jobs? How can there be harmony between communities? So they named it the Eat What Conference. And today, I think this is critically important because in the Muslim world, we have committed uh, contextual suicide and intellectual suicide. We have mainstream organizations, and we are quite familiar with those organizations. Not one of them speak for women's rights. Not one of them. They think everything is fine. Maybe some, but most of the mainstream organizations. They're clamoring for civic rights in the United States, while the same rights are denied and deprived for the Muslim women all over the world. Just visit some mosques, you will see the entrances, a side entrance for the woman, the prayer spaces for the women. It's very rare. So once a month, I always say, why can't a woman uh, lead and offer prayer at a mosque? This is 2021. But it's hard for us to get there because mosques today are boys' clubs with carpets and ceilings and air conditioning and fans only for men. So I say with humbleness and with humility that in the Muslim world, particularly, that it is not enough for us, for the men who lead the organizations to say, I'm not a racist, but one must be an anti-racist. So it's not enough to say I support women's rights, but they must fight strongly for the anti-discrimination of the women. So as a feminist, there's always a tension of being a Muslim feminist. And it's a revolutionary act for me to stand up and speak the truth. But again, I go back to Dr. King about the concept of moral reciprocity. It is speaking up and taking a deeper inventory of what is happening within the community. And when we choose to silence the voice of women, uh, we don't arrive at the right places we need to arrive. So I shall speak today from my shared life experiences, my experiences that informs me. So first I'll touch a little about Sri Lanka and what is happening for the Muslims in Sri Lanka. And then I will, at this moment, I'm going to ask Michael to show that video on Sri Lanka. And then I will talk about why the Muslim communities the world over must really abandon this quest for patriarchy and misogyny. Uh, while he gets that done, I want you to know I was born in Sri Lanka. I lived in Sri Lanka for 30 odd years, and I came to the United States about 25 years ago. My mother was a Buddhist and my father was a Muslim. So I was raised in this rich tradition of both my parents, being able to celebrate the diversity of my mother and what she stood for, and my father and his family, and what they stood for. So in Sri Lanka, of course, I never did any activism. It was all about, I practiced law for about 10 years before I came to the United States. And some of you might know that on September 11th, 2007, when I went to pick my 7-year-old son from school, he came to me crying and he asked me, Mommy, are we terrorists? And that day I had to tell him that I had to really comfort him. And then I realized after 9/11, the Muslims in America were going to have a very hard time. So I put my heart and soul into getting to know people of different faiths and understanding the challenges that were ahead for us. And that's what took me to the world of activism. Mike?
It is a land of unparalleled beauty.
Can you hear that?
Yes.
Yes.
Hey, Susan.
Okay,
Good
here we go.
job.
This spot of earth, once known as Ceylon, is surrounded by the Indian Ocean and by centuries of custom, culture, and religion, all forming a tapestry so timeless, so unique, that Buddhists, Hindus, Christians, and Muslims all call it home. But a dark colonial past has left its mark on Sri Lanka, and 4.5 centuries of control by the Portuguese, Dutch, and British remind Sri Lankans that culture can be fragile and coexistence can be shattered. And so even here, in this tranquil place, religious extremism born of old fears can grow until finally but restoring peace is possible, and it's why Omnia is in Sri Lanka, building interfaith peacemaker teams. It's not something we bring in from the outside. It grows from within, from the hearts of men and women, Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim, and Christian, who believe that love is stronger than hate, that justice, fairness, and cooperation are the tools for forging a good and peaceful life, and that a nation's strength lies in its people, listening to, learning from, and living in solidarity with one another. If you agree, then we invite you to team up with Omnia.
It was worth waiting for.
Oh, it's a beautiful island. Um, so we are talking about the persecution of Muslims in Sri Lanka today, um, because my mother was a Buddhist and my father is a Muslim. So I'm in the thick of the conflict. Can you all hear me? Yes, okay. So I'm in the thick of the conflict and I see both positions very clearly. So what happened 2 years ago on Easter Sunday was that uh, a bomb went off and about 270 people died. I'm not sure if I remember the Easter Sunday bombings. So thereafter, the Muslims are being severely persecuted by the majority Buddhist population. First they did was during the last year, because of COVID restrictions, they started cremating Muslim bodies, which was very unfortunate. Muslims, we don't cremate bodies, we always bury. And going from to the United Nations, to grassroots activists, to mobilizing people, uh, they declined to bury. And then the UNHCR vote was coming on Sri Lanka, and then of course there were some negotiations that took place, and now they have permitted Muslim bodies, Muslim dead of COVID, to be buried rather than be cremated. The excuse that was given was that once you bury, COVID can spread. And there was a lot of scientific evidence to say it cannot. But the government continued. We have a very Buddhist nationalist government in place today. The Buddhist monks have openly supported this government, and they are marginalizing the minorities. So Muslims form about 8 to 9% of the Sri Lankan population. The Buddhists are 72%. The Tamils, who have their origins in India, they're about 12%. So there's a lot of racial strife in Sri Lanka, and the Muslims have been now brought into the center. Because of the Easter Sunday bombings, things are getting worse for the Muslims. And as a result, Muslim shops get constantly burnt down, and Muslim women are harassed, and there's a lot of communal tension right now that is happening in Sri Lanka today. So this is a cause for great concern. And when I saw that these things were happening in Sri Lanka, and nothing exists in a vacuum. So there were things that happened where the Muslim community also, the Muslims within Sri Lanka, the leaders, the clergy said, they began to ghettoize the Muslims, where they said Muslim women have to veil, because Saudi influence was very high in Sri Lanka. They were funding schools and the Wahhabi theology, and I mean, it doesn't. Nothing happens in a vacuum. So a lot of things happened, and they became they began to take over. This extreme branch of Wahhabism was trying to raise its ugly head in Sri Lanka. And in that context, when the bombs went off on Easter Sunday, killing 270 people, the Buddhist nationalists woke up and they were up in arms and they were trying to marginalize and stigmatize the Muslims very much, very badly. And the Muslim community, on the other hand, was obsessive about wailing the women. There was no space for reason and reform for the Muslims within the community. And the clergy came to the front, and they began attributing everything to Islam, and no universal rights and values were spoken about in the Muslim community. And they went as further to say there can be no morals without religion. So everything was Islamicized. So this also impacted us as Muslims, because we lived in very good harmony with the majority communities. As you can see, I'm a product of that. My mother was a Buddhist, my father was a Muslim, and I was blessed because I learned and reaped the benefits of belonging to both the communities. So the situation in Sri Lanka for Muslims today is very bad. It's very bad because in Sri Lanka, minority communities were allowed to follow their own personal laws for marriage, for divorce, for custody, for inheritance. And there is a move to abrogate all that and bring everybody under the common law. They're going to cancel, they're going to um, stop the application of personal laws that Muslims had availed themselves of a long time. So, and you wouldn't believe a Buddhist monk is spearheading this to really prevent the Muslims from following their own personal laws. And in some regard, we dug our own graves. I think we were promoting some dogma that was not relevant for the 21st century. The religious actors who were in charge of these conversations said there can be no morals without Islam and religion. And this particular research is not just peculiar to Sri Lanka, but if in Indonesia, in Pakistan, in Iran, and most of the Muslim majority countries, a survey was done, and 90 to 98% of the people said that there can be no morals without religion, and that religion has to be Islam. So the religious actors who were taking center stage, who were leading this conversation, took us deeper into another abyss where we tried to promote in Sri Lanka, particularly child marriage. And in Bangladesh, as you know, 52% of the Bangladeshi marriages contracted were child marriage for Muslims. And of course, now it is changed to 26%, I think. And then in Nigeria, where we work, polygamy has led to extremism and violence in Nigeria. And we saw where men, I remember once I was in Nigeria. Sorry, after the fast, my mouth is running dry. The man who came to pick me up had 15 children, had 4 wives. So these children were raised in a very haphazard way. They were, at a very tender age, they were enrolled in Al-Majri schools. They were not supervised. They were brought under this extreme wing of Wahhabi theology, where they were taught that the caliphate and Muslims should rule. And from that sprang Boko Haram. Of course, there was a level of persecution that followed, but in Sri Lanka, as in Sri Lanka, we had a level of extremism that was brewing. And then in Nigeria, I witnessed the same with Boko Haram, where they said no education for girls. That is what meant by Boko Haram. So in Sri Lanka, then the religious clergy, the Muslims, they wanted to keep in place FGM, female genital mutilation, and the Muslim marriage and divorce laws uh, were, were meant, they said, cannot be changed. It has to be followed to the rule. And even as I speak to you, in the Muslim world in Sri Lanka today, they are saying women cannot be judges. This is the inside story I'm saying, not based on something I've read, but I've experienced it. And in this context, I realized there's so much work for me to do in Sri Lanka. And that's where when I began to switch most of my work, and I focused heavily on Sri Lanka, because it hurt me and it pained me to see for the where the extremists, the nationalists were taking Sri Lanka to one degree, the Buddhists and the extremist religionists were taking Sri Lanka to another degree. So the Muslim religious actors said women cannot be judges. Inheritance had to be unequal. Men had to inherit more, and uh, blasphemy laws, as you know, in Pakistan, and you don't have to confine yourself to Sri Lanka to see what's happening where there's theocracies. Blasphemy laws in Pakistan, just a month or two ago, they shot dead an American who was facing a trial for blasphemy. So they wanted to really reinstate all these laws um, that were very archaic and had no bearing and had no universal values. And we know that in France, the Samuel Paty's murder was coming from a space of blasphemy. Don't insult the prophet. And then the recent incident in France also, where there was another murder where again it was blasphemy laws, don't blaspheme. So so in this context, Sri Lankan Muslims, I feel, have disempowered their women. And the main motive, uh, uh, I believe, is not really to empower the women. Nobody wants to empower women anywhere. We women, the fights we conduct are based on the way we are being marginalized, particularly from within our communities, uh, by the people who have a very strong say in the religions. So the Muslims in Sri Lanka being persecuted on the one hand by the government of Sri Lanka, and the other hand by the religionists, and at the receiving end are women who are disempowered in a big way. And I think the Christians have faced this. They have left that station. So have the Jewish communities. The Reformation, the reform movements are very, very strong. And I have hope for Sri Lanka that we will birth a new generation of thought and critical thinking in the Muslim world. As long as today what we see is a reinforcing of the functional distinctions uh, imposed on women in the 7th century, 1400 years ago, is what we are trying to bring back. And friends, believe me, this is a very strong movement, and this stifles Muslim women. And I myself, I'm called an Islamophobe. That the minute we raise our voices and say this is not right, we are put into a box. Uh, so everything that we have to do, there are predominant groups. One says, this has to conform to Islam and nothing can change. There's another that says this is not compatible with Islam, therefore it cannot change. And there's another that enjoys the privileges of both and then keeps quiet about it. But ultimately, one who suffers is the Muslim woman. And patriarchy, we know, is not only confined to the Muslims, but it is mainstream in the Muslim world. It has state power in most Muslim majority countries. If you look at Iran, if you look at Saudi Arabia, and this particular brand of Wahhabism, unfortunately, has been exported to Sri Lanka as well. And that is where this all began, and that which finally led to the Easter Sunday bombings, where 270 people were brutally murdered by suicide bombers at 8 locations, at churches and at plush hotels in the capital city of Colombo. So my whole thing is to say that I speak from my experience, from my travels. I've witnessed it. Women are severely marginalized, and I remember female genital mutilation happens in Sri Lanka. When I was there, I wrote a huge article and I said to the interfaith communities, question this practice within the community, and not and call to account the men in my community, because they're not going to listen to me because I'm a woman. And women's leadership and scholarship is not heard of in Sri Lanka as well. And it's a struggle to be relevant. We know in 1975, Amina Wadud led a prayer for Muslim women in Virginia or New York. I mean, she got death threats. And none of the mainstream Muslim organizations ever celebrated her. Today, her leadership matters a lot to us because we women, we don't have sufficient role models to speak up. Because when you are questioning theology, you are really putting your life in line, and that is true. I mean, I am blamed and shamed in my community more than anywhere else, and I realized this because a few years ago I organized a tour of Oregon because I met a colleague who said, "Come, the Oregonians need to hear your message about Muslims." So I went there with excitement, and I traveled. I rented a car. I traveled thousands of miles, met thousands of people, and I was trying to really talk about the position of Muslims in the United States after 9/11. We were stigmatized and marginalized. But the minute I come back to my community in Los Angeles, I mean, I have to wait for permission to speak up in a mosque. I, the men in my community behave as if they are the recipients of God's message, and the women are the benefactors. And this is sad. So my cry and my plea is that uh, if if a prophet could be born by a woman and given birth by a woman through her womb and uh, reproductive systems, uh, what is that we are fighting about a woman's right to stand equally and then, at least be given equal recognition? And I'm firm believer that the extremism we witnessed in the past with ISIS and the likes, if we women had preached to our children from our mosques, we could have preached a different theology, one of compassion, kindness, not the what was taught in our mosques in most parts of the world. In Los Angeles, I mean, we have irrelevant sermons. I've quit going to the mosque. It's all about rituals and what happened 1500 years ago. There's no contextuality in teaching because we have men who are versed in the text but not in the context. And that is a huge negative for us Muslims, and that impacts the Muslim woman a lot. And we Muslims, I feel, largely, we are lost in a pile of rules. This is what God said, therefore this is what you can do, and this is only what you can do. We have failed to embrace the contextuality, and that is changing a little, but it is really very slow for us because let's just leave aside the United States, but when we look at the world at large, I say the richest place in the world is the graveyard where Muslim women are buried. With our gifts, talents, and abilities, we are buried. And only in spaces like this that I myself learned to thrive, because you gave me a voice, you gave me permission to speak. And that, I think, that needs to happen in our mosques, because in our mosques and in our religious institutions, we have a captive audience, and we have to preach the equality and equity for the Muslim women. For years we have been marginalized. So the purpose of this kind of patriarchy and misogyny is to make the Muslim woman devout, so that she can go back in time and play that role. And where they forget is that the first wife of the Prophet, Khadija, she was a businesswoman and the Prophet worked for her. And I say I belong to that progeny. I have a voice. I want to share that, and I want to empower little girls in Afghanistan and Pakistan and Iraq to stand up and speak up, because we have an agency with our Creator, and we have to model that. And that is why I call upon, sometimes maybe harshly, because time is of essence, because we have to break that cycle. And where better can we do that than the United States of America? We're surrounded by friends who will support us, surrounded by forward thinking other religious or other communities. I mean, surrounded by the freedom of being able to speak, not to be not to be imprisoned for saying something. Uh, so this quest to silence the woman in the Muslim world is uncompromising. All modern life they think has to be governed by divine commandments, and that there's a time and a place for that, but we can't that can't be the main agenda. And I call upon my interfaith community friends to ask, to question how the women are treated in not maybe so much within the US, but where are you originally from? How are the women faring in those communities? Is there something that needs to change? And propose and work for that change within the United States is critical. When I was 13, I went to my mosque, local mosque in Sri Lanka. And they told me, you can't come here. You can't stand and claim for equal space. And that story is still true for me. I have to use a side entrance in most of the mosques. I have to stand behind, and that's fine. I don't mind standing behind, but give my voice, my vision, a space as well. And I worked in Bangladesh, where a 16-year-old girl is a victim of child marriage, and child marriage is rampant even in Sri Lanka. In Nigeria, it's bad, and I think there's child marriage in all religions, and so many states still practice child marriage even in the United States. But the difference is that they're not asking it to be enforced. It is legal, but it's not asked to be enforced legally. So there is a huge difference there. And then I met, we have the Kazi system of courts in Sri Lanka today, where for family laws, divorce and custody, women go to the Kazi court. It's a quasi-judicial court. I met this woman called Rizna, whose husband left her. And even before the custody was determined, even before the alimony was determined, even before the support for the children were determined, the man has gone and married again, because there's polygamy that's permitted. But if you read the Quran deeply, it is permitted only to care for an orphan and in war times. But the changes are being haphazardly implemented by the Muslim world, and nobody questions that. So this woman is lost. She has lost her alimony, she has lost her child, and now she's waiting in line for the courts to decide. And case in point, in India, a group of Muslim women led the triple talaq movement. As you know, there's provision for a man to say talaq, talaq, talaq 3 times. Of course, there are intervals, and to pronounce divorce. Men in India were texting the talaq, hey, I am divorcing you, talaq, talaq, talaq. And women were disinherited in a big way. They were not supported. So a group of women went to the Supreme Court of India, and they got this talaq law abolished or abrogated. It's still in the process, but something is happening. And then not to forget to mention the persecution of the Muslims that's happening in India today by the Hindutva movement. So this is such a complicated situation. And for me in Sri Lanka to raise these issues is very sad today, because my community of Sri Lankan Muslims are marginalized. They're ostracized. And then we also need the reform and the rethinking and the realignment and the reimagining. So I have to look for deep spaces to share this. And it's a very big challenge. Yeah. So being so why I speak is that a girl in Afghanistan will have the courage to hear, yeah, it's okay, I need to question the patriarchy, I need to question the misogyny, this is not right, we are created equal, the Quran is very clear, we are created equal in the image of God. So it is the patriarchy, and the hadith culture. Hadith is the saying and the doings of the prophet that were recorded about 300 years after the prophet died. Just imagine what goes into that. This is written by men to favor the men. So this impacts the women. And today, fortunately, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 5 is gender equality. So I feel we have a race and we have to run quickly. We have to have policies and procedures in place where Muslim women are equally welcomed in their spaces of prayer, particularly in their mosques, where that's where we congregate and we talk about the community and we promote ideas. And that should not be confined only to the men in my community, but it should be spread broader for the women. Because right now, this is not Islam that is happening. It is culture. It's culture that is happening, and tradition. In Saudi Arabia, women were punished if they did not wear the headscarf. Women were not allowed to drive. And all of the Muslim world looked up to Saudi Arabia because Mecca is located there. And today countries like Sri Lanka specifically, I talk about this because that's where I'm there like 6 months of my life working within the communities, trying to tell the Muslim women, speak up, question everything, ask for nicely rational answers. Today in Saudi Arabia, they finally decided that it's okay for a woman to drive. Just imagine, it's 2021. And my goal is to popularize and democratize these ideas, because even as you hear, those of you who are not Muslims will join us and support us, and to democratize those ideas within the community so that it is okay for us to question this patriarchal theology. So we have to enhance women's voices and scholarships within the mosques. I remember writing, I didn't write personally, but when after the events in Florida, where there was the nightclub, over hundreds of people were killed, I had asked the Islamic Center of downtown to put a sign saying that all are welcome. That never got done. And I have always been agitating, give the space one Friday of the month for a Jummah prayer. Let women lead prayer. No, but nowhere in the Quran does it say that women can't lead prayer. I mean, are we saying that women have nothing of value and quality to share? So this has to change. That change has to come from within my community, and I accept that. And lastly, I want to leave with a optimistic message where. About 4 years ago, a friend of mine opened the first mixed gender Muslim women mosque. Mixed gender. We have the women only mosque in Los Angeles, the mixed gender mosque. Men and women both were called to pray. And then she invited me to lead the prayer and the sermon. And I was the least qualified, but I was the most prepared. So I was able to lead the prayer. And 2 doors next was the Zaytuna Institute. Uh, uh, um, and we had invited them. Not one person even showed up. But a couple of months later, the Girl Scouts, the little brownies, they had collected $350 for the Kalbu Mariam Women's Mosque in Berkeley. That is the level of engagement that we Muslim women lack from within the community. I shared this in the spirit of as Dr. King had spoken, called moral reciprocity. What is it that I can do without constantly having to complain? This is wrong, that is wrong. How can I change some things that is happening in my community? So in that regard, I have been very honest and candid, and there's need for change. There is a extreme need for change. So please support Muslim women's voices. We need this, and that's why I founded the Muslim women speakers, because women's voices are powerful, and I think we have a larger role to play than organizing the food at the mosque. We have a powerful message to give the next generation. And thank you for listening. I'm ready to take questions.
As I see people's hands raised in order, I'm going to call them. The first hand I saw raised was Steve Rohde.
We cannot thank you enough for this talk and your honesty. So with limited time and several hands raised, let me ask you the following. Can you put in the chat the best resources, whether it is your writings, a book on, did you say Hadid was 300 years later than Muhammad and introduced many of these cultural restrictions?
Yes.
Hadid?
Hadith.
Hadith.
Hadiths, yeah, the sayings and the life of the prophet.
So if you're able to share the resources now or later with us, and we will share them, my question is, and we have had Ani Sonnenfeld with us in terms of progressive Muslims as well, speaking along these themes. Is it your belief that the Quran, fully understood, is not a scripture of oppression of women? Those who support those views sometimes selectively cite passages from the Quran to support their views on the separation and oppression of women. Are you convinced that that is a misreading of the Quran, that the teachings of Muhammad and his life experiences with women do not support their discrimination and separation, and that this is in fact a post-Muhammad distortion of the Quran?
So I was once listening to a rabbi in New York. He said, every one of us have to be ashamed of some aspect of our religion. So I will not, Islam has its own aspects. The Quran has some laws that do not favor women. But what we Muslims have failed is, we have failed to embrace the contextuality of that teaching, to give it fresh interpretation and look at it in the context. We take one verse and we try to just say this is the law. And so do the people who are bigoted. They take one verse and say this is Islam. So we are pushed on both sides. So if a very familiar verse for me is the verse on polygamy, because I do a lot of work in Nigeria. It talks about, oh men, if you have to care for orphans, that's how it begins. So there is no orphan situation now in Sri Lanka particularly, but men are marrying. So they don't take the context why was this verse revealed. So so the literalists, the conservatives, the strict interpreters of the Quran, they will go with that. And we, Steve, we have this problem in all religions, right? Yes. And I remember the Havruta studies I was engaged in when I was in Israel. That was beautiful, because we had about 10 people in a circle and 10 opinions were solicited. There was no judgment. And I don't see that happening in my community as much. It's a top-down theology. This is what the Imam said. This is what the scholar said, therefore this is it. And if you stray from that, you are called, and I'm not a supporter of the word Islamophobe. I myself have been called an Islamophobe. I don't fear
Eh,
Islam. I fear the interpretation given by certain patriarchs.
Is there the best book that expresses your views, or have you written articles on this that you can share?
Yes, yes. I have articles, and there's a new version of the Quran called the Study Quran Guide. I will send the link to you after the program. Yes.
Okay. On the list of questions, I have myself, Carol Francis, and Anthony in that order. And I would just like to say that what I think I've learned from listening to you, one of the things I think I've learned from listening to you is that Islam is not a monolithic religion. That is, as my family faith of Catholicism is not monolithic. There are things about Catholicism that I think are shameful, and there are things that I think are really admirable. And so I want to know if I'm interpreting what you said correctly. And I would also like to ask or mention that going back to the period following the 9/11 attacks, unfortunately, I think there were a lot of feminists or people who professed to be feminists who backed the military intervention by George Bush and Dick Cheney in Afghanistan. That there were some women who identified as feminists who came forward and said, yes, we have to protect the women of Afghanistan, and that what that meant was we needed a military invasion of Afghanistan, an attack in the name of defending women's rights. So would you comment both on the idea that the big religions of the world are not monolithic, and secondly, can feminism be used inappropriately to attack predominantly Muslim countries?
Okay. So what happened in Afghanistan was a tragedy in an experimental way. America, I mean, we can't export our democracy to those countries. And when we were trying to empower the women without the men, they resisted. It cannot happen. The culture, we don't know the culture, we don't know the tradition. And even when I was in Sri Lanka, I realized we are bringing in experts from the United States to address the issues in Sri Lanka. It is deeper than that. You have to sit with the villages. You have to understand their pulse. You can't impose a solution that is American. And that was a huge mistake in mobilizing Afghan women. And today it's a very dark place. 57 young girls were murdered. Suicide bombers killed last week for seeking an education. So wherever we have been involved, we have to engage more the locals and look for ground up solutions. And the United States have failed miserably in that regard. We are trying to impose something that is not that is not compatible with those cultures. So that was and it, however flawed, the culture is, we have to work within that in a very strategic way. And I think we have failed big time in many of the countries. We have several intentions with which we go, but it has backfired.
Thank you. On my list, I have Carol Francis, Anthony, and Jasmine just added. So Carol Francis?
Yeah, thank you. how much of what is attributed to the teachings of Islam are actually from pre-Islamic Arabian culture, or at least that part of Arabian culture, in terms of how women should dress, how women should be treated and everything? How much of that existed, and in what way did Islam liberate from there women and others, slaves and others, from what had existed before?
I think when you look at Islam in that time, the prophet really, I mean, I struggle with some of the things like the number of marriages and all that. Is hard to explain, but he had motives, they say. But what happened was, it's more than the theology, Carol. It's our pushback against philosophy. We didn't want anything to do with modernity. We thought it will dilute the religion. So when the Sunnis that form 90% of the Muslim population, they said the divine creed, that is the law. And they narrowly started interpreting. If you look at the Ottoman Empire, I mean, it was vibrant and thriving, led by Muslim scholars and Jews and everybody. Maimonides, I don't know, Steve, is that how you say that?
Maimonides.
Yeah, Averroes. I mean, they were great. Ibn Rashid is Averroes. I mean, he was a great philosopher who brought in these ideas, you know. He said reason and revelation could exist together. And it's fascinating to see how the Islamists crushed that movement. And time and again, they have economic power and they crush that movement of reasoning. So that is what happened. And text and scripture, uh, that is another study altogether. You know, if we go to run to the scripture to read and understand everything, to implement it in the present day context, I mean, we are never going to leave that era. Like for instance, if Rosa Parks was to get permission from people to sit in the front of the bus, she will still be getting permission. So there must come a time when a conscious movement must evolve and embrace some universal laws. But that was never allowed to happen in the Muslim world. And that is our downfall. And that is why I say this: we live in the United States and we can make that happen. We can make that happen. And that is why not enough Muslim leaders, even within the United States, are speaking up, especially for these liberal values within the community, because they're all afraid to touch religion. It's a very sensitive topic. But if you may not have to touch, but empower us women who are feeling strongly about it. Now, even Ani, for how long she was marginalized. So, but she didn't leave, and she built this collective consciousness. And today her voice is being heard. Today they invite her. Today she is a leader, a big leader in our community. So answering, did I answer your question? Like all ancient cultures, you know, the first to be attacked are women. Women were taught to play certain rules. They were exempted. Today they're excluded because of that exemptions. And I think the community has to recognize that. Because of that exemption, the exclusion has been justified. And that is what has happened, if I were to put that in one frame.